Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for the highly anticipated Glass. And what Glass is essentially about is we center on, of course, our three characters, David Dunn, Glass, and now what they're calling the Horde. And basically, David is now, he's now known as the Overseer. He's trying to track down, the Horde and things like that. They end up in a bit of a scuffle, but they're then taken into this mental facility, and basically they are told there that all of their superpowers and things like that, that's all in their head, and basically the rest of the film, they eventually realize that Mr. Glass is in that same facility, and the rest of the film is them trying to get out of it, but also trying to prove that they are in fact superheroes, and that's really all I'm going to say. To say a film like this is highly anticipated would be a huge understatement. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest films of the entire year. In a year where there are so many huge, highly anticipated films coming out, this is definitely one of the biggest. And the fact it's coming out in January, especially, kickstarting the year in terms of, really big films, it is saying a lot. And I was very excited to see how this film would turn out. I did rewatch both Unbreakable and Split. Unbreakable is, I still think, M. Night Shyamalan's best film. I mean, there were just so many great ideas and so many different sort of tones and things like that. And it went against the grain of basically any superhero movie you saw then, but especially superhero movies you've seen now. You just don't see a superhero movie quite like that. And then Split was just such a great psychological thriller. It was very thrilling. It was very eerie, and it reminded you of, something that Hitchcock would do. And the way that film did leave off, of course, it just got me so pumped for this film. And I will say this, Glass is not nearly as disappointing as everyone has saying. That being said, it is not the epic conclusion that you may have been hoping for. And I'm just getting into it right now, starting off with the cast. Now, I don't really think I need to say much here. The cast here, they're all phenomenal. Everyone really does do an incredible job. I don't really think there's a single dud in this cast. Everyone is just really on their A game. But especially when it comes to James McAvoy, who obviously, coming off of Split, which was just such a multifaceted and just such a different type of performance from really anything you see, it's a lot to ask for him to top his work, but he honestly does do it here. There is one scene especially where there's this light that they have in the institution where anytime the light goes on, he switches into a different personality, and what he's able to do there, you just forget that this is the same actor. He completely convinces you that he is these different personalities. You really do get to learn a lot more about some of them, which I definitely did like seeing. McAvoy, you can just tell he is embracing every sense of this role, and I truly do think this is one of his best performances to date. I mean, there's a lot to like about this film, but McAvoy is easily the best thing about it. It's honestly astounding the work he's able to put into a role like this. It's so different. It's unlike anything we really have seen, and I loved really everything about his performance here. It was absolutely spectacular. Someone else I really do have to credit, though, is Bruce Willis, because a lot of people are going to be a little bit worried, because obviously Bruce Willis, he has not really been caring as of late, and I'm happy to say this is the best performance he has given in years. I have not seen this level of effort and this level of likability from him in quite some time. You can tell that he enjoys playing the role of David Dunn. There definitely are a couple points where, there definitely are a couple points where there's some questionable lines of dialogue, but for the most part, he's really good here, and I was very impressed by what we got with him. And when you factor Samuel Jackson into it, who also is on the top of his game here as Mr. Glass, has so many incredible scenes, just seeing those three converge, seeing them just interacting, it's incredible to watch, and all three of them do really excellent work throughout this entire film. As far as the supporting cast goes, they also did a really great job. Anya Taylor-Joy in this a lot more than I was expecting, and while I don't think she tops her performance in Split because she doesn't have nearly as much to do here as she did in Split, she still does a really great job playing Casey Cook. Casey, she's obviously trying to get over the trauma of what the Beast has done to her, but at the same time, she's trying to move away from it, and I really like seeing that. I thought that Spencer Treat Clark also also comes back as David's son, and he's really good here too. And Sarah Paulson, let's talk about her. I really did like her in this film. Her character we'll get to a little bit later, but I liked what she did here. She definitely did have some really good scenes, and really everyone just does a very good job here. I liked seeing pretty much everyone in this film, and I do think the acting was very strong here. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because this is where things get a little messy. Now, in terms of M. Night's directing, I don't really need to complain that much there, because the tone of this film, it is the right one. You know, you definitely do get that sense that this is what everything has been leading up to. You definitely do get that sense of finality. There are some extremely thrilling scenes, and it definitely is directed very well. You can tell that this is something that M. Night has wanted to do for a very long time, and I think he did a very good job in terms of his directing here. I was overall impressed by it. Like I said, the film itself isn't really darker or lighter than Split and Unbreakable. It basically is somewhere in the middle there, and I think he did a really good job with that. He really did combine the two tones pretty well together, and I was overall impressed by his directing. The writing, this is where things do get very messy, because look, there's a lot of things to like about Glass, a lot of things in terms of the writing. I'll just say right now, just seeing all these characters come together, as I already touched upon, it's really great to see, especially seeing like the Beast and, you know, Mr. Glass interacting, which we know is going to happen from the trailer. It's not a spoiler. Seeing those two work together, it is fantastic to see. There's a lot of great work going on there, and I really do enjoy that a lot. And I think the best parts of this movie are actually seeing those two interact. What Mr. Glass's initial plan is, how he wants to do the Beast to his advantage in the film. You know, seeing the Beast really try to fully emerge as like the sole personality was really great to see. We see a lot more of the Beast in action. We get a lot more into what the Beast's actual goal is, and I think they did a really good job with building that up. And just seeing all the various personalities within Kevin, who, without saying much, it's basically his film. Like, out of all three of them, he really is the one that's in it the most. They just do a really great job with setting all of that up, and I was overall very impressed by their interactions there. It's definitely one of the best parts of the movie. Those two work so well together, and I really did like what they ended up doing with them. And the initial setup as well, getting to the hospital, is extremely well done. The film takes place about 2 or 3 weeks after the events of Split, and you see how David, he's been trying to go after the Beast, and seeing those two finally just, you know, fight and finally converging, I mean, it definitely is earned, and you definitely do get that sense of urgency that you really do want from that, and I think they did a really good job with setting that up. Where the film does get messy for me is once it gets to that hospital, because, again, I love the interactions between Kevin and between Mr. Glass, but if you're noticing, I'm not talking that much about David, minus that opening, you know, 10 to 15 minutes before they're in the hospital, and that's mainly because, aside from the opening scenes and a couple scenes in the middle, David is not really in this movie that much. That's not to say he's not an important part of this movie, because he is, but he just doesn't feel like he is. There were a lot of points in this movie where I was enjoying what I was seeing. I liked seeing the interactions between, you know, Mr. Glass and the Beast, but I kept waiting for, where is the Overseer? When is he really going to come in here? When is he really going to come to fruition? And it doesn't really happen. They sidelined him a lot in this movie, and I wouldn't have a problem with that if what we're focusing on is just as interesting and just as multi-layered, but it's not. Instead, what we get is a very one-note character from Sarah Paulson, who, again, is really good in the film. I don't want to discredit her acting, because she does do some really great stuff, but her character, I just did not care about. She's so one-note. The entire purpose of her character is just to convince these three guys that everything that's, you know, that's been going on with them, all of their powers, that's all in their head, and that, you know, everything that's happened, it's something that was like prescribed or it was through drugs, and that she's going to find a way to convince them that they are not superheroes. And again, I would not have a problem with that if that's not all she did in this movie, but really that's all she does, is she's trying to convince people, even trying to convince like, say, Casey or Joseph, and it just gets really bothersome after a while. And I get what they were trying to do, I really do, but when you have a character like David Dunn, who is so multi-layered, and has a lot going on with him, especially in this film, I mean, there's one thing especially that they bring up that they just really never come back to, and that honestly really did bother me, and instead you focus on this character that isn't bad. Like, I'm not saying that Sarah Paulson's character is bad, there never was much to her. I did not really care that much for her. You don't really understand why she cares so much about this. Why does she want to convince them of this? And it just did not really work as much for me. After the 4th or 5th scene of her doing it, it did honestly get kind of tiring, and I think they could have done a much better job with focusing on David Dunn. And, you know, I wish they really would have done more with that there, because, again, again, when he's one of the central characters in the film, he just doesn't really feel that way, and I think that definitely was a problem here. Something the film does do a good job with, though, even though David Dunn is not in it a lot, is they actually do give a lot more to the 3 people in these men's lives that have affected them, that being Casey Cook, Joseph Dunn, and of course, you know, Mr. Glass's mother. They actually have a lot more to do here than I was expecting, and I actually really did enjoy seeing that. I thought I liked seeing these 3 interact. I liked seeing them trying to harness their abilities, but also trying to convince Sarah Paulson that what's going on is very much real, and that they are the ones to help them out. And I think the film does a really good job of that. The film does actually have a really interesting message that I don't really want to get into, because it does spoil the ending, which, don't worry, I'm getting to that. I'm getting to the ending. It does spoil the ending, and I don't want to get to it, but I do really like what they're trying to say. I think the message itself, it is a good one, and I like the way it's done. The problem with this movie, like I said, is because they sideline David Dunn so much, when we get to the ending of this film, the way things are wrapping up, it just doesn't really feel as earned. Now, I'm not saying everything doesn't feel as earned. There are some things in the 3rd act that I actually quite like a lot, probably more than others, honestly. I think there's a lot of very interesting ideas that they throw at the end that I actually really did enjoy. But then there's some things that happen, and while I understand what M. Night was trying to do, it just did not really feel particularly earned, and I did not really get that sense of finality, and really that sense of satisfaction that I really wanted to. It did not feel like this was something that Shyamalan had been working on for 19 years. It felt like he wanted to do a trilogy, but he didn't really know how to end it, and he ended it there. And I'm not saying everything felt like that, but there's one thing especially that happened that I just do not think felt earned at all, and it just did not work for me. Now again, the very end of the movie I cannot get into because it involves major spoilers, and if you guys want to hear more, I'm going to be doing a spoiler review, so I will delve more into it there. But all I'll say is, again, there are a lot of things I do like here, but just considering the way things ended, it was not as neat as I really would have wanted it to be, and I think they could have done I think Shyamalan could have done just a little bit better of a job with that. Also, and this is perhaps the thing that I think is going to make a lot of people upset, you know, considering the way Unbreakable ends, we're all waiting for that confrontation between David Dunn and Mr. Glass. We're waiting for those two to collide. We're waiting for them to have that conversation, and I was really hoping it was going to happen. There was a point where I thought something was going to happen there, and it never really does, and that was very disappointing to me. And I really do think if you could have added one more scene there of just those two having a conversation and those two sort of just settling things out, and, you know, David Dunn telling Mr. Glass what he knows and Mr. Glass telling him what he knows, I think it would have just made for a little bit more satisfying of an experience, and I do think that that was a missed opportunity overall. Again, there are a lot of things I do like, but that was one thing I really wanted that I just sadly didn't get here, and I was a bit disappointed by that. Also, in terms of the dialogue in this movie, there is some really great dialogue here, and there's definitely some things that I really do enjoy. However, I will say there is this one thing in the film where constantly Casey and Joseph, they are looking at comic books, and they're trying to compare a comic book to what's going on with the characters in reality, and again, I get what they were trying to do, but after a while, it actually did get a bit tiresome. There's so much on-the-nose dialogue where they're comparing it to a comic book, and it doesn't really get that bad until the third act, but there were a couple instances where I'm like, alright, I get what you're trying to do, but I'm not stupid. Like, you can tone that down a bit. You don't really need to be saying that. There's a lot of on-the-nose dialogue where the characters are saying things that we really don't need them to say, and you could just obviously show us what's going on, and I think we get the same impact, if not more of an impact. And again, I think that definitely was a mistake overall. In terms of cinematography, there are some really great shots in this film, especially in the beginning. The opening scene between David and the Beast, it is very spectacular, and it's very thrilling, and you really do get that sense. And there's a lot of really good scenes that are done like that. I do think there are a few too many point-of-view shots, but for the most part, I was impressed with the cinematography. The scene in the asylum where all three of them are together, one of the best scenes of the entire film, and I loved what they end up doing there. There's some really great shots in this film that I was very impressed with. In terms of the score, now, the score that they use, I like a lot. It gives you, it's very breakneck. It really does give you that rush, and I do like it a lot. It's like this sort of like ticking clock score that I really did enjoy. However, there are points in the film where you're waiting for them to maybe do like a cue from Unbreakable. It doesn't really happen. And I know you don't want to be like fan servicey or things like that, but there's one instance where I do think they could have actually played the Unbreakable score, and it would have made the scene feel a lot more epic. And they just didn't do that, and I think that was overall a missed opportunity. I would have actually liked to hear that score at least once in the film, but they don't really end up doing that, and that, again, did let me down a bit. In terms of the editing, I don't really have a huge problem with the editing. My problem with the editing, again, it's more what they decided to focus on, because we know that M. Night Shyamalan has said that there is a 3-hour and 20-minute cut out there, and I'm not saying that I need to see that thing, I need to see, the full 3-hour, 20-minute cut, because there very likely could be stuff in there that he decided to cut down because it would make the movie too long. But I do think that 2 hours is just not long enough to tell the type of story here. If the movie would have been 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think we could have gotten more stuff with David Dunn. We could have maybe gotten some more scenes that got us to care more for Sarah Paulson. And most importantly, we would have gotten more interactions between David Dunn and Mr. Glass, which, like I said before, we don't really get a ton of here. You don't really get that big sort of scene between them that you're sort of hoping for. And I was a bit let down by that overall. But again, I was really never bored with this film. It is a slow burn, but it's one that I was pretty much on board with for the ride. The third act does kind of make it feel a little less, it makes it feel a little less earned. But, like I said, there was really never a point in this film where I was like, alright, can we wrap this up? This is getting boring. Like, again, there were Sarah Paulson scenes I wasn't the hugest fan of, but I was never really bored watching the movie, and I think they did a really good job with that. But again, I would like to see a director's cut. If M. Night decides to make a director's cut, I really do want to see, because I do actually think it would make the film a lot better, and I kind of wish he just stuck with that original idea, because, again, it might be over long, but I think it just would have felt a little bit more complete, and there are quite a few things in this film that I think if he would have put them in, it just would have tied up things a little bit more, and it just would have been a little bit more of a satisfying experience. Other than that, that's really all I can really say. Again, I'd love to say more about the ending and things like that, but again, I'm going to do a spoiler review. I'm going to end up discussing it more with some of my friends, I believe, like tomorrow night. So if you guys want to hear more thoughts on the film, you'll hear it there, because it is a film that is difficult to talk about without spoilers, for sure. It's similar to like Infinity War and The Last Jedi and things like that, where it is a film that is a bit hard to review without really delving into spoilers. So again, I can give you maybe a more comprehensive review there. But again, at the end of the day, I can say I walked away liking what I got, just not feeling as satisfied as I could have been. There are a lot of things in this film that I really do admire. It's very ambitious. It's wholly different than what you're expecting, and I really do applaud Shyamalan for going there. I just wish that there were a few things that could have been done a bit differently. But in my mind, the film that we got, I'm not necessarily disappointed by. I just wanted a little bit more from it. I think it would have just made for a bit more of a satisfying experience. So overall, I am going to give Glass a B-. But overall, guys, for my spoiler-free review of Glass, look forward tomorrow when I'm going to be doing a spoiler review, which, again, I think will just give you a better take on what I actually thought of this film. But that's really it for this review. Hope you guys enjoy it. If you have seen Glass, let me know what you guys thought of it. Love to hear your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.